Queen's Head privatised.
The usual contribution from Dennis Skinner, though I did think for a few seconds we weren't going to get one. He's normally in a little more quickly. But a sharp political observation from the Labour backbencher, the veteran MP for Bolsover, represented Bolsover since 1970 in the House of Commons. This is the moment where members of the House of Commons now make their way to the House of Lords to hear the Queen's speech, led by Mr. Speaker. Blackrod having a word, Mr. Speaker, I suspect possibly about the little delay, but I'd love to be a lip reader. Clerk to the House of Commons. There we have the Prime Minister, Ed Miliband. In animated chat, Harriet Harman for Labour, Ed Balls, Chancellor George Osborne, Yvette Cooper, Ian Duncan Smith and Philip Hammond, led by the Speaker's chaplain. Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, chatting to Harriet Harman there. This is the moment, Nick, I suppose, where, especially where Ed Miliband and David Cameron are concerned, they know the cameras are on them. And we have had a hint of frost in the past with some leaders, but they're having a very friendly conversation.
Friendly, animated for the cameras, of course. Actually, I've not heard any suggestion they don't get on perfectly well. I mean, in the sense of their political enemies, let's be honest. They want, one wants to replace the others. But you sometimes hear behind the scenes, you certainly did in Gordon Brown's day, of leaders who really disliked each other. There's no evidence of that at all. You could see it there, actually. They're quite capable of both having a good gossip and a chat.
Don't imagine that all of these MPs are going to fit into the House of Lords, because they're not. In fact, I wonder why some of them actually make their way there. There's not a lot of room. There we have Charles Kennedy there, the former Lib Dem leader, Simon Hughes. There's not a lot of room at the bar of the House of Lords. Possibly no more than 30 or 40 MPs can fit in there. So once you put in the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader and Cabinet Ministers, there's not a great amount of room there for, let's say, 500 or 600 MPs. But in the House of Lords, we now have Blackrod and the Speaker, Clerk of the House, and closely followed by Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Labour Leader, Deputy Leader, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats too, William Hague, Foreign Secretary, Eric Pickles, the Community Secretary, had a very busy day last week, the local elections. And they will wait now until most of them are in. The Earl Marshal has told the Lord Chancellor to offer the speech to Her Majesty. Chris Grayling, the Lord Chancellor.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government's legislative programme will continue to focus on building a stronger economy so that the United Kingdom can compete and succeed in the world. It will also work to promote a fairer society that rewards people who work hard. My government's first priority is to strengthen Britain's economic competitiveness. To this end, it will support the growth of the private sector and the creation of more jobs and opportunities. My ministers will continue to prioritise measures that reduce the deficit, ensuring interest rates are kept low for homeowners and businesses. My government is committed to building an economy where people who work hard are properly rewarded. It will therefore continue to reform the benefit system, helping people move from welfare to work. Measures will be brought forward to introduce a new employment allowance to support jobs and help small businesses. A bill will be introduced to reduce the burden of excessive regulation on businesses. A further bill will make it easier for businesses to protect their intellectual property. A draft bill will be published establishing a simple set of consumer rights to promote competitive markets and growth. My government will introduce a bill that closes the Audit Commission. My government will continue to invest in infrastructure to deliver jobs and growth for the economy. Legislation will be introduced to enable the building of the High-Speed 2 railway line, providing further opportunities for economic growth in many of Britain's cities. My government will continue with legislation to update energy infrastructure and to improve the water industry. My government is committed to a fairer society where aspiration and responsibility are rewarded. To make sure that every child has the best start in life, regardless of background, further measures will be taken to improve the quality of education for young people. Plans will be developed to help working parents with childcare, increasing its availability and helping with its cost. My government will also take forward plans for a new national curriculum, a world-class exam system, and greater flexibility in pay for teachers. My government will also take steps to ensure that it becomes typical for those leaving school to start a traineeship or an apprenticeship or to go to university. New arrangements will be put in place to help more people own their own home, with government support provided for mortgages and deposits. My government is committed to supporting people who have saved for their retirement. Legislation will be introduced to reform the way long-term care is paid for, to ensure the elderly do not have to sell their homes to meet their care bills. My government will bring forward legislation to create a simpler state pension system that encourages saving and provides more help to those who have spent years caring for children. Legislation will be introduced to ensure sufferers of a certain asbestos-related cancer receive payments where no liable employer or insurer can be traced. My government will bring forward a bill that further reforms Britain's immigration system. The bill will ensure that this country attracts people who will contribute and deters those who will not. My government will continue to reduce crime and protect national security. Legislation will be introduced to reform the way in which offenders are rehabilitated in England and Wales. Legislation will be brought forward to introduce new powers to tackle antisocial behaviour, cut crime, and further reform the police. In relation to the problem of matching internet protocol addresses, my government will bring forward proposals to enable the protection of the public and the investigation of crime in cyberspace. Measures will be brought forward to improve the way this country procures defence equipment, as well as strengthening the reserve forces. My ministers will continue to work in cooperation with the devolved administrations. A bill will be introduced to give effect to a number of institutional improvements in Northern Ireland. Draft legislation will be published concerning the electoral arrangements for the National Assembly for Wales. My government will continue to make the case for Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, My government will work to prevent conflict and reduce terrorism. It will support countries in transition in the Middle East and North Africa, and the opening of a peace process in Afghanistan. My government will work to prevent sexual violence in conflict worldwide. My government will ensure the security, good governance, and development of the overseas territories, including by protecting the Falkland Islanders' and Gibraltarians' right to determine their political futures. In assuming the presidency of the G8, my government will promote economic growth, support free trade, tackle tax evasion, encourage greater transparency and accountability, while continuing to make progress in tackling climate change. Other measures will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
Queen's speech has been delivered, and the Lord Chancellor, Chris Grayling, has received it back into the purse, and the pages of honour ready to help as the Queen and Duke prepare to leave the chamber of the House of Lords. Her Majesty returns past the gentlemen-at-arms, through the Prince's chamber, back into the Royal Gallery and back to the robing room, ready for the departure. Black Rod giving the signal that MPs can now return to the House of Commons, ready for their debate later on. Back in the Royal Gallery, the heralds leading the way. Sword of State dating back to the 17th century, one of the symbols of the sovereign's authority. Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall listen carefully to the speech. The cap of maintenance, just there on the bottom left of frame, another of the symbols of royal authority, dating back to the days when the Pope used to offer a cap of this kind to his favoured monarchs. It's a relic of those days, it's still a symbol of royal authority. Once the ladies in waiting are back in the robing room, doors will close, and then it won't be long before the Queen and the Duke are ready to leave the Palace of Westminster. Distinctive white plumes of the gentlemen-at-arms, formed by Henry VIII as his personal bodyguard. Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, almost back in the House of Commons. Always a great contrast, isn't it, when you see the rich red and gold of the Lords, and then back we come to the Commons and it's sparse. all very jolly as they return to the House of Commons. The mace back in place. Mr. Speaker soon be in the chair. And there we have the Prime Minister and the Labour leader just wandering around the dispatch box, wondering what to do. There's a big debate coming up, and of course it's a good moment at this time, Nick, I suppose, for us to talk about the content a little more, because that's really the substance of the day. You can enjoy the pageantry, but really the substance is what the government intends to do with its powers. So 15 bills, 2 of them in draft form. What would you pick out for us? As the MPs return here, what would you pick out as the main items?
It's dealing with a legacy of unease about the impact of mass immigration, and it wants to be seen to deal with it. I'm sure a lot of the politics will focus on that, the economy too. But I think what is always striking on days like this is the things that don't make it as the big political battlegrounds, which really make a dramatic impact on people's lives. For good or ill, it may be the government's getting it right or wrong. Childcare, pensions reform, social care reform, these are things, consumer rights, only in a draft bill now, these are things that will make a real difference to people and may not be the turf on which elections are fought.
What is going to be, I mean, as we look ahead, to 10, 12 months, what is going to dominate political debate from this list? Or is it going to be dominated by things, as you suggest, that are not in it, not least our relationship with the European Union, for example? Not least
that, not least the economy. I mean, it will still be the economy, won't it? The argument in politics from now to the general election will still be, are Labour right to say if they cut too far too fast and it's not working, the economy isn't growing, or is the government able to say, no, it was slower than we thought, but it is beginning to work? And in a sense, a day like this can't capture that. The government has got some measures in it here that it thinks will make a big long-term change. High Speed 2 could be a dramatic change to the structure of Britain. It was something at one stage that all parties supported. It is something we'll look back on in 30 years, as I say, for good or ill. There are some deregulation measures and so on, but I think government ministers wouldn't claim that bills are the way, that new laws are the way that you get an economy growing. I don't think Labour would claim that either. They would claim there are budgetary measures that could be taken, but they're not essentially about new laws, but of course that will carry on dominating politics.
So for viewers watching, Michael Fallon, who are thinking, okay, what is there a dominant theme from this Queen's speech? What are you saying to voters today in terms of your ambitions and your plans? Is it a series of measures, none of which emerges as the prime one, or would you point us to one in particular? Is it immigration?
Well, we've seen, as expected, some of those long-term things like reforming pensions and making sure that if you go into care, you don't have to sell your home. Things that really should have been tackled a while ago and are now being tackled. But there are also their immediate measures to, for example, to make it easier to employ people. The employment allowance that will start next April, so it'll be much easier for shops and small businesses, cheaper for them to take on people. That will have an immediate effect on the economy. And also there are measures there to help consumers. There are measures of consumer redress to help people who are vulnerable to be placed on the cheapest energy tariff. That's very important. So there are immediate measures and some long-term measures. But I think you'll see across the piece some 15 bills. This is still a government with plenty of energy and plenty of reforms that it wants to carry through to make sure this country really is fit for the challenges that lie ahead of us.
All right.
Well, I think a lot's missing from the opportunity we've got today in this Queen's speech. We've got, 2 years to a general election, and, this country is still facing huge problems in terms of jobs. I mean, even those people who are in work are not getting the hours they want, wages are depressed. So if you talk about consumer rights, let's look at things like rail fares, the fact that people are facing increasing rail charges. Let's look at energy, which has gone up to £300, gone up £300 in the last few years. And there's nothing in this Queen's speech about reforming the energy market and giving tougher powers. No, we have
The energy bill is in the speech.
No, the energy bill doesn't deal with the fact that we have 6 energy companies that dominate 98% of the energy sector, and in doing so dominate the way that sector works and its impact on consumers. There's nothing in it. On the pensions, it will be interesting to see what the government's saying about that. But for example, one of the hidden charges for people are within their pensions. Someone can retire and find out that half the money they've put in has been swallowed up by charges. There's nothing in there on capping those charges. Those are real issues that people are grappling with in terms of their day-to-day costs of living and planning for their future. And there's nothing in this bill, this Queen's speech about that.
I think it's significant that the Queen started the speech by talking about the economy. I think the rationale for the coalition in 2010, after no party won an overall majority, was to try and get to grips with the deficit, to try and get the economy back on its feet again. And that rationale 3 years later is as strong today as it was then, and it will be as strong right through the duration of the Parliament. You don't need to create new laws in order to try and get the economy back into balance. You just need to stop spending vastly more than you're getting in, which is, of course, what the last Labour government was doing.
You're borrowing vastly more, and nothing's really happening. Growth's not there.
Well, get back to the question. We are borrowing significantly less. We're borrowing a third less than the last government, but we are still borrowing more than we would wish to. But we are going in the right direction. Can I just very quickly just finish? But you can nevertheless help the economy with some of the measures that are in the Queen's speech on deregulation, on intellectual property, for example. And the other point is it's not just about the economy. That is the central mission, the objective of this government. But I think at the same time we have to have a longer-term view about the type of country we want to live in. And those are the type of points that Michael was making about long-term care, the problems that people have, families have when they have a very elderly relative who has to sell their home, pensions reform. Those sorts of measures are about creating a fairer, more decent society as well as fixing the economy at the same time.
Look, I think social care is vitally important. We know at the moment that, you know, something like, you know, £18 million a month extra is being spent in the NHS because fewer people are being discharged from hospital because the care isn't there for them. And that's why we've said we've got to get greater integration between care outside of hospitals and the care within. I think that can provide a better service and also reduce costs overall. But it's also about trying to address some of the issues now in terms of jobs. There's nothing in there for young people in terms of jobs guarantee or those in long-term unemployment. That's just not there in this Queen's speech.
Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh preparing to leave the palace, having a quick word with the Lord Chancellor, Chris Grayling, and the Lord Speaker, Baroness de Sousa. And ready with his white wand of office, the wand which signifies his authority, as the Lord Great Chamberlain Marquis of Cholmondeley, who is in charge of these royal sections of the palace, so in charge of the robing room, in charge of the Royal Gallery, and in joint charge with some of the parliamentary authorities of Westminster Hall itself. Joining the Duke of Norfolk as they go down towards the Sovereign's entrance. This Norman porch, as it's called, because it was meant to be decorated with portraits of Norman monarchs, but that never happened. But it's still known as the Norman porch for that reason. The heralds now lining the route. The Earl Marshal thanks Her Majesty and says goodbye. So the royal salute is sounded, telling the world that the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh are ready to leave the Palace of Westminster after this state opening of Parliament, the 60th state opening that the Queen has attended. Leaving in the Irish state coach. Emerging, a few hints of sunshine, just a few hints of sunshine in the skies above Westminster. Band of the Welsh Guards standing by. Direction of Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Barnwell at the St Stephen's entrance. Guard of Honour, found by the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards with the Queen's colour. Sovereign's escort passes Westminster Abbey on the left-hand side and St Margaret's Church on the way back along Whitehall, along this very familiar processional route, through Horse Guards, then along the Mall, back to Buckingham Palace. Back inside the Palace of Westminster, ready for their second departure duties. Duke of Norfolk and the Marquis of Cholmondeley now saying goodbye to the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall after a visit which has been underlined for its significance today. These things carefully choreographed, usually. Waiting for the carriage to be prepared. So with the news yesterday, Prince will be representing the Queen at the Commonwealth Summit in Sri Lanka in November. It's all being talked about in the context of sharing the Queen's burden of responsibility. The fact that the Prince and Duchess here today, the first time attending together, also being seen as a statement that the burden is being shared and that the Prince is taking an even more prominent role in these duties at the age of 64. Safely inside the glass coach. Ready for the 12-minute journey back to Buckingham Palace. Glass coach, traditionally the bridal coach, as we know, in some of the royal weddings. Last used, I think, at the Queen's birthday parade last year, and it brought the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh to trooping the colour. So they emerge into a little bit of sunshine, as I said, from the Victoria Tower, the tower which houses many, many thousands of acts of legislation, scrolls and parchment and all kinds of priceless documents. That's where the store is. Band of the Welsh Guards preparing to sound another royal salute here for Prince of Wales. Unusually calm, of course, on these streets because everything is cleared on state opening day, and the roads down along Millbank, down to Lambeth Bridge, from Parliament Square, all of it locked off, really. Security is at a maximum. The great view there. Just appreciate some of the splendid architecture of Westminster Abbey. And the Union flag now flying again above the Victoria Tower. At midday, Queen having left, the Royal Standard has been lowered. And the third formal departure, because as I explained earlier, the Imperial State Crown and the other items of regalia, the cap and maintenance, the sword of state, they have their own procession, just to underline their importance in today's events and to underline their symbolic power, because they represent the monarch's authority and supremacy. There we have a good view there of the cap of maintenance. the long white plumes of the gentlemen at arms fluttering in the breeze as Andrew Ford, controller of the Lord Chamberlain's office, prepares to take charge of the crown once again and take it back safely to Buckingham Palace before it's turned then to the Tower of London. Crown jeweller. And the maces. Again, the maces taken back in the procession.